And the next speaker is Jean-Marc Giller,
Director of the National Natural Reserve of the Grand-Lieu Lake. And he will speak about the evolution of water plants on the lake. Good morning, everybody. Yes, I represent the National Society of Nature Protection, an NGO deeply involved in preserving wetlands. We created 90 years ago the Camargue Reserve, for instance. So, you've heard a lot about this area, and I'll speak about monitoring and assessing macrophytes. I will provoke you. This is not a lake. It's more than 60 square kilometers in winter. That has already been said. It's a shallow lake, which has as a consequence a very particular way of functioning where water plants play an important role with macrophyte and cyanophytes. Floating plants are important. It's a siltation factor. It's also an important element of our natural heritage because it's a shelter for birds and plants. You can see one on the picture. For all these issues, functional issues and heritage issues, you have to understand its evolution, and it will give us more elements about the evolution of the lake itself. We're lucky enough to know very well the history of the lake. Now we know the lake for its birds, but 1 century ago the lake was more famous for its plants. Two botanists at the end of the 19th and beginning of the 20th centuries worked a lot in an innovative way on the Grand-Lieu vegetation. And the two plants you can see there were iconic, but they've disappeared. Nevertheless, this is our basic knowledge in time. Loïc said that the lake was very different. We can see the differences on both photographies and evolution of the lake vegetation in the 40s, 50s. People spoke about ramping vegetation that was doomed to invade the lake, including the central area, but now the situation is completely different, and we've seen a decline of plants, submerged and amphibious plants, bulrush, typhus, reeds. How can we measure these changes? This is the issue I'll deal with. Aerial photographies helped a great deal to follow up the evolution of the vegetation. Floating macrophytes, in particular, with IGN projects in particular. At the beginning it was made through analogical photographies, now it's digital with geolocation and the help of simple softwares to interpret these pictures. Two samples of images of the center of the lake. On the right, you see the interpretation of the left picture. Zoom in on the central part of the lake and the result of the monitoring. That map was made in 2015. In green, you see dominant floating macrophytes, water lilies, and purple you can see water chestnut, a drop in its population, and things almost don't see at this scale. The fringed water lily, bulrush in light blue and dark blue, open water that spreads between reed bed and floating macrophytes. You've got pictures of the main species, fringed water lily, top photography on the left. Recent evolution of the surface area of floating macrophytes has been monitored since the beginning of the 21st century. What we can say is that we have detected a huge variation, a drop about chestnut. The scales are on the right part of the picture, evolution of water lilies. With a quick evolution, the scale is on the left for the species in 2006, a huge drop, and then slowly going up again. This corresponds to the introduction of the Louisiana crawfish, first presence detected at the beginning of the 2000s, and in 2007 a huge increase. We didn't worry that much when we detected the drop because it went up again, but not as fast as we expected. If we go back further, we've got good figures from the 80s. Beforehand, it was more difficult to interpret aerial pictures. The system at the beginning of the 80s was as follows. The dominant species was water chestnut, the 60 hectares of plaques, and water lilies were already present. These species are not really demanding. Water chestnut and fringed water lily, as well as other water lilies, are not really demanding. So we have to find out other factors to explain the situation. Here in the picture, aerial picture of the 50s, you see all the spots that are lakeshore bulrush, and on the right we see that the system has changed dramatically. In red, you've got areas where the floating vegetation has disappeared, with a privileged, with a location focused on the northeast of the central part. This is where we had a drop in the presence of water chestnut, also water lily macrophyte, evolution due to the influence of the wind. It's a physical impact of waves and winds attacking these floating macrophytes. We can also see at the Oignon area and Malais area an evolution between 2006 and 2007. So erosion of the floating vegetation. This monitoring can give us information about the difference between the central area and the evolution of illophyte, evolution of reedbed, willow and alder woodlands, evolution of the last 15 years, whitening of the central areas, destroying the lake vegetation such as willows and alders, evolution of the vegetation. We already had signs at the beginning of the 70s, and with the cross-analysis of different data, more than 400 hectares in 40 years. Enlargement of the central area in 10 years, in red, all the areas of willow woodlands and reed bed, general enlargement of the central area that can be easily explained, taking into account waves and any mechanical erosion. In the western part of the lake, we can see that some areas have completely disappeared. So here we have to take into account the specificity of these floating vegetations. As a consequence, they just disappear through erosion without any comeback. Whereas before we could have a vegetal dynamics that would replace a plant with another one. Matching the mechanical erosion, we also have retro-coastal erosion, creation of small lakes because the vegetation disappears, and these areas are part of the year lakes, and when there's no water there are reed beds with anastomosis. Different small lakes appear here and there where there used to be a homogeneous situation. Here, for instance, we can see major retro-coastal regression as an example of what I've said. As a conclusion, for the evolution of the central area, we've got a change in the vegetation of the lake, whether it is water or lake plants, as Luc said it, impact on aquatic plants, and strong decline of the main floating macrophytes, chestnut, fringed water, or water lily, and a slow progression of white and yellow water lilies. So an obvious erosion of lake vegetation, reed beds, carex stands, willow grove, alma stands. In comparison with what happened in the 40s, where everybody doomed the lake to disappear, but we have seen unexpected impacts. On the other hand, what are the factors at work? Many of them complex interactions. So many different factors in the 60s with big changes in hydraulical. The Grand-Lieu Canal, the recalibration of the Ashno River, impacts on the central area and the sediment stability, creation of a sluice gate, and management and change of water levels. Eutrophication has a major role in this situation with nitrogen and phosphorus actions, and also the animal nutrient muskrat. All these factors multiply one another in order to deepen the disappearance of the vegetation, erosion, turbidity, etc. So there is a vicious circle, and now phytoplankton and cyanobacteria dominate. The hydraulical change at the outlet, northern part of the lake, Ashno Canal, carrying waters towards the Loire River, the sluice gate regulating the water level, and the creation of the Grand-Lieu Canal that is used today as a main canal for evacuating waters. In the 60s it was 6-7 meters wide. Now it's 20 without any human intervention. So a bigger slope, and as a consequence another erosion factor. Is there any reason to hope for a better situation? François said things about the policy of the catchment area. We should aim at a local improvement of transparency that has already started. This is connected to what Alexandrine said. We've got different areas balancing each other in the lake, and in the same areas a first resurgence of some aquatic plants, Xenicalia, Naias, real aquatic plants that need light to grow, and we've seen an increase in this presence of these species with carrot that is a bit demanding, which is also encouraging. So is it a temporary phenomenon or a long-term phenomenon? So there are reasons to hope for a better situation in the future. Wait and see. Thank you for listening. Thank you for your presentation. Have you got comments or questions? Just a comment. I've always wondered about the role of herbicide and the impact on these plants, in particular the nacre. But as you said it, the water level doesn't have much impact on this species, but it could be very sensitive to herbicides. And typhus also could be very sensitive, plus the action of animals, rodents. It's a good comment. Chestnut was considered as a pest, has also the same situation elsewhere in France and in Europe. So it's interesting to think about this trend. I've got a question on the Grand-Lieu Canal, because this project had a huge hydraulical impact on the lake. I think we haven't measured enough the role played by this canal on the internal circulation, and in particular on the mud. So would it be interesting to shut down the Grand-Lieu Canal and let the water follow another natural path as it was before? So are we working on this trend? The project exposed by Alexandrine is a project aiming at having a very precise understanding of all these phenomena. The Grand-Lieu Canal is an option. Another project in the 90s also aimed at controlling the volume of water passing through the Grand-Lieu Canal. It was built up only for aesthetic reasons, and the impact it had was not expected. So closing up shutting down the canal maybe allowed us not to have a siltation situation. Apparently some improvement is happening, so maybe it's not the priority to work on this canal. I have a question. The erosion of what is called levee in French. We have made very precise measurements. The organic matters in the central areas provoking a quick siltation. The measures don't show there is a quick siltation, and in this case winds help a great deal. This washing machine that is the Grand-Lieu Lake doesn't help the vegetation on the one hand, but on the other hand allows the denitrification. Thank you very much, Jean-Marc Gillier.